based here in Calgary. Here's how he explains this case.
It's a parcel of land. It's like you and me with a home. You allow the utility to come in to give you water, electricity, and gas, right? But you still own the property, and that's what we're doing with this pipeline because it's in the national interest of the United States to move crude oil from Cushing to Texas to get it refined and used for domestic production. We're asking for a piece of their land, to build a pipeline. But again, the landowner always owns the property. They'll be compensated for the easement, and if they're a farmer, would compensate them for any crop damage and ensure that the land is returned to its original state so they can continue to farm on it.
All right, that's TransCanada spokesperson Terry Cunha. Julia Trey Crawford is the person on the line who owns that land that we're talking about. What do you make of what you're hearing from TransCanada?
Well, we've heard that story, multiple times, and what he didn't say, and what he didn't share with you guys is our land also houses some of the most recognized Caddo Indian artifacts. TransCanada knew that, and they knew that they were in that pasture. They did 2 archaeological surveys, and interestingly enough, the first survey confirmed they had to move the pipeline route from this pasture, from the one area of this pasture, because there were too many artifacts. When they came back with the second archaeological survey, said, you know what? We found a sliver of land through this pasture that's completely clear of artifacts. Even though there's artifacts on the north, west, and south side, we thought that was statistical and probability. We've been gathering arrowheads on this land for 60 years. So we hired our own archaeologists and confirmed that where TransCanada said they found 0 artifacts, we found artifacts on top of the proposed pipeline route. So can Terry say that by trenching through a pasture, he can return all the destroyed artifacts? They can't. I mean, there's such a complex story.
I appreciate
but yeah, he's right. We pay taxes on the land.
Yeah.
But we are unable to build a road across it. We can't cross it at a certain angle. We can't build on top of it. So yeah, it is an easement, but you lose control of the land you're paying taxes on because they have a permanent easement on it for the rest of known mankind.
Your story's started to garner a lot of public attention. I know the New York Times has picked up on it. I know you've been getting hundreds of emails, donations, letters. You're heading towards this June hearing with TransCanada. How do you think this is going to end? What do you hope happens here?
Well, we think our case is pretty strong that we can punch holes in this common carrier thing. There was actually a Texas Supreme Court ruling last year called Denbury Green, and another farmer did exactly what we did. He pushed back and said it was a different pipeline, but he said, I don't believe, Mr. Pipeline, that you have the right of eminent domain on my land. And the Texas Supreme Court ruled that when challenged by a landowner, the burden of proof falls upon the pipeline to prove they are what they say they are, that they meet the qualifications. Are they for the public good? What are you transporting? Is what you're transporting listed in the Texas Natural Resources Code? And diluted bitumen is not listed in the Texas Natural Resources Code. There's an argument there that TransCanada is going to say it is, they're calling it something different.
Just out of curiosity, I'm sorry to interrupt, but because of time, I'm curious. Have you heard from any Alberta farmers about this?
We haven't, but I just got a phone call this morning from a North Dakota farmer who's fighting it too. And what's been fascinating is, can I plug our Legal Defense Fund website?
Sure.
Okay, it's standwithjulia.com, and we've been getting donations through that, little bit by here, but last week's New York Times article brought them from around the world. And there is a story, David, in just the notes I'm getting from people from England and Switzerland and Germany and Canada and Hawaii and Alaska, is that you guys are standing for all of us who believe that property rights are something that need to be protected.
Well, it's a hot button issue here in Alberta as well. This is a fascinating case, and we look forward to hearing how it turns out. Thank you so much for joining us with your story.
David, thank you, and I hope you'll want to follow as we move forward in June to the hearing.
I'm sure we will. That is Texas Farm Manager Julia Trey Crawford, and her blog, if you'd like to read more about this case, is standwithjulia.com.
If you're traveling south on Deerfoot Trail, just be aware that south of McKnight Boulevard, we have 2 vehicles off on the right side, partially blocking the right lane. They're changing a tire, so the drivers are out of the vehicles, changing the tire on one of them. Thanks to Koner, who called to report that to me this morning. morning. Also, we're just seeing volume everywhere else on most of the major routes. So if you're using 16th Avenue in the northwest, it's starting to build for eastbound traffic right around 29th Street Northwest. And we're in for a rather indecisive day. We're going to see a lot of cloud cover, maybe some showers later on, a high of 17. It's 12 degrees now at the airport, 9 at the CBC. The wind this morning out of the southwest at 4 kilometers per hour. And it turned out to be a really great May-long weekend, David. I don't know if you had the chance to go anywhere near a retail outlet selling bedding out plants over the weekend. I made the mistake of wandering in. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely crazy over the weekend. We're also starved for color. So the sunshine this weekend inspired lots of gardening enthusiasts to start digging. And that, of course, meant a busy weekend for garden centers around the city. Colin Adder is the owner of Plantation Garden Center.
This long weekend is the 19th, 20th, and usually we're frost-free around the 23rd, 24th. So a little bit early, but the forecast looks good. You know, lately the edibles is huge. Tomatoes, fruit trees, cherry trees, apple trees, different tomatoes, heirloom tomatoes. Anything you can eat, people are just going crazy for. Kale is probably the most popular vegetable right now. Everybody wants kale. That's been kind of what I've seen the trend for this last year has been. A lot of people are getting into the low maintenance gardening where they want to get rid of their front lawn and make it into a nice rock garden or, you know, just low maintenance shrubs. People just aren't into cutting lawn anymore, I don't think. This has definitely been one of the nicest seasons I can ever remember. Not much for early or late frosts. It's been the weather's just been beautiful, and it's been fantastic to not have so much rain followed by one good day where we can't handle the crowds. Like today is nice, it's busy, but if we had a week of rain, it would have been really busy and probably unmanageable. So we've had a nice stretch of good weather lately, so we're happy.
That's Colin Adder from the Plantation Garden Center, and I think a lot of people were happy they got to pick out their plants. We'll see when they can put them in.
You know where else it was busy this weekend?
Where?
The Spy Hill dump. Out at the landfill.
Little spring cleaning going on.
My wife and I had 2 romantic drives to the Spy Hill landfill this weekend. Fantastic, really. When you
know how to treat a girl, don't you?
Well, no holds barred. But I'll tell you this, it would lined up like crazy. For some reason, they didn't have the prepay lane open, so people were lined up forever trying to get in and out of there this weekend. I'm not sure why they just had one pay window, but
who knew?
I have never seen it that busy at the landfill, and I try to get there whenever I can, of course.
Why wouldn't you?
Oh, the sunset over the landfill with the call of the birds. Really romantic. Thanks very much, Angela's coming up to 5 minutes now before 7 o'clock here on the Eye Opener. There may be a rail strike in Canada as early as tonight. David Blair has the latest from the CBC Business Desk. Good morning, David.
Hi there, David.
This is CP Rail.
Yes.
This evening? Really?
Yes, could shut down as of midnight tonight because the union representing the conductors, the engineers, the traffic controllers, and the likes are threatening to walk off the job. Their contract expired in January. They've been negotiating with CP since last fall. And, you know, it's one of those stories that we've talked about in the past where CP is apparently demanding major concessions on pensions and wages. And this goes back to, you know, a lot of these legacy companies that have defined benefit pension plans that, of course, back in the day were, you know, ironclad and many of the large companies had them. Well, they're now obviously weighing down as the baby boomers get older, and this is obviously on the negotiating table for several companies at this point. We've seen these kind of struggles on a lot of other Canadian companies. The interesting question here is whether or not the federal government is going to intervene. The Labour Minister, Lisa Raitt, had said on the weekend that CP Rail was of national interest and national concern, and we've seen her block job action at Air Canada, also at Canada Post, or you know, forcing settlements in many ways on these companies and on their employees. The Harper government has been very interventionist in sort of an unprecedented way, really, in Canadian politics. So the negotiations continue this morning, but the government has not said whether or not it would block the right to strike or to lock out. CP does say, however, that if job action causes any disruption tonight, that it will proceed in what they're calling an orderly shutdown for operations. But obviously a concern for everything from mining, fertilizer companies, grains, and the overall farming industry.
Very interesting. That will be one to watch, of course. You know what I saw this weekend? I don't often check Facebook, but there, sure enough, a little message from Mark Zuckerberg that he got married.
Yes.
You know?
Changed his status to married.
I didn't even know we were friends. But, okay. So he married Priscilla Chen. How did that whole Facebook launch go last week? Because there was so much hype around it.
Yep.
Did it meet expectations?
No, certainly did not. And in fact, it turned out to be a very weak launch for the company. The markets were open yesterday in the United States, and the stock slid 11%. It was the biggest stock offering in history for a tech company, and it opened on Friday at $38. Yesterday it hit $33. It opens at $34 today. The question this morning is whether or not the investment banks made mistakes. Was it overhyped? Many critics saying it was way too highly priced. So that'll certainly be one that we'll be watching this morning.
I would think so. So what are you seeing in the numbers?
So the markets are all to the upside today. The European markets are significantly higher, about 1.3% in London, 1.3% in Paris. Similar numbers in Frankfurt. The Asian markets were higher today, about 1% in Japan. The U.S. equity futures pointing to a slight higher opener. Actually, it's a mixed open on Wall Street. Oil is down 45 cents a barrel to $92.12. Natural gas down 2 cents, $2.59. And the Canadian dollar is up 1/3 cent, 98.3 cents U.S.
Thank you, Mr. Blair.
Thanks, David.
David Blair from the CBC Business Desk. Let's check in with Kirk Hoyser and your local news headlines.
Thank you, David. Coming up on the news at 7:30, CBC has learned some Parks Canada staff in our city could soon lose their jobs. We could be seeing more food trucks on Calgary's roads, and we'll hear why a group of Calgary teens feel they were victims of discrimination when they went to see a movie. Details in about 30 minutes.
Hello, John Hancock with CBC Sports. New Jersey is even the Stanley Cup Eastern Conference Final at 2 games each, beating the Rangers 4-1. Zach Parise scored twice. Phoenix will host LA tonight, Game 5 of the Western Final, with the Kings up 3-1. It's on CBC at 6. Edmonton Oil Kings lost 5-2 to the St. John Sea Dogs at the Memorial Cup, and the Blue Jays beat Tampa Bay in baseball.
Thank you, John. In traffic, those drivers changing a tire are gone. They were southbound on Deerfoot, south of McKnight Boulevard, blocking that right lane. The tire's been changed, everybody's moved on, and things are rolling along quite nicely there. If you do see a problem, please give me a call. Pounder star 1010 or 403-521-1010.
Angela, could you move your potatoes?
No.
No? No. Oh, you rebel. The city has told a group of urban gardeners to uproot their potatoes from a vacant Calgary lot. We'll find out what is behind the potato scandal. And our science and technology watcher, Matt Stamball, will join us. Trekkies Unite. They are planning, at least thinking about, building a real-life Star Trek Enterprise. We'll find out what that's all about. It's coming up to 7 o'clock. Time for Local 4.
This is CBC News. Good morning, I'm Zintar Sirs. This is World Report. The future of Afghanistan and Canada's role in it is now clearer. NATO leaders met in Chicago over the past few days, and they agreed to hand control of Afghanistan security to Afghans. The transition is already underway, and NATO's goal is to end its combat mission entirely by 2014. Canada's Prime Minister confirmed there will be no Canadian troops in that country after that date. But as the mission winds down, there are new worries. James Fitzmaurice reports.
I don't want to paint the world with real challenges there. There's no doubt.
U.S. President Barack Obama invited Pakistan's Prime Minister to Chicago in part to try to smooth things over. It didn't work.
But we're actually making diligent progress on it.
In November, a U.S. airstrike mistakenly killed 24 Pakistani soldiers. Pakistan wants an apology and an end to airstrikes on its territories. In retaliation, Pakistan has closed its roads to U.S. military vehicles. A serious problem when trying to run a war in a landlocked country surrounded by mountains on one side. UK's Prime Minister David Cameron.
Of course, it is frustrating. If Pakistan Pakistan is a strong ally and friend of Britain. We have a
Pakistan's relationship with NATO has always been complicated. Prime Minister Stephen Harper says there are many issues that need attention.
I don't think it's any secret that the continued presence of safe havens for the Taliban in Pakistan is very problematic for
NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen says there's only so much others could do in what he calls a bilateral dispute between the U.S. and Pakistan, but he is encouraging them to set aside their differences.
We need a positive engagement of Pakistan if we are to ensure long-term peace and stability in Afghanistan.
There is a consensus from all members in NATO that with time, Pakistan will come around. They say all that's needed is patience. James Morrison, CBC News, Chicago.
Conrad Black says he intends to continue fighting to overturn the convictions that put him behind bars. In an exclusive interview with CBC's Peter Bansbridge, the former media baron reveals that he is also fighting to hang on to the Order of Canada and other honors that he received 2 decades ago. Mike Harper reports.
So you're trying to have those convictions overturned? Yes. Whereas when those need them done.
He spent $30 million on lawyers in a failed attempt to avoid a prison sentence. Now Conrad Black will spend more money trying to quash the fraud and obstruction convictions.
I'm so mistrustful of that system that I wasn't going to do it while I was still physically in their possession.
Black admits it's a faint hope, but a pardon would clear his name.
My request for pardon is still outstanding.
He asked former President George W. Bush for a pardon and was ignored. The request was even endorsed by Bush's father, former President George H.W. Bush.
He declined to act on thousands of applications he received, and not all of them were as distinguishedly sponsored as mine.
Back home, Black has another battle going. He's trying to hang on to the Order of Canada he received 22 years ago. It's now said to be under official review.
I mean, it would be a terribly upsetting thing if any such injustice was inflicted on me in addition to those that I've already had to endure.
Last August, Black reveals he wrote the Advisory Council of the Order of Canada, chaired by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, explaining why he should keep the honor. The next step would be the council calling him in for an interview, or not. For now, freshly out of prison and back in Toronto, he keeps his Order of Canada and his membership in the Privy Council and the diplomatic passport that goes with it. Others saw their honorifics yanked almost as soon as the court pronounced them guilty, but the wheels in Conrad Black's review grind very slowly. Mike Hornbrook, CBC News, Toronto. The life of a Canadian on death row in the United States now rests in the hands of the governor of Montana. Late yesterday, the state's Board of Pardons and Parole denied clemency to Ronald Smith. The decision came after a hearing was held earlier this month. Smith has been on death row for 30 years after pleading guilty to shooting and killing 2 men. Briar Stewart reports.
In a written statement, the Board of Pardons and Parole said its decision was difficult but unanimous. It recommended that the governor of Montana not give Ronald Smith clemency. Smith previously admitted that when he shot Thomas Running Rabbit and Harvey Madman, he was in a drug and alcohol-fueled haze. He originally asked to be sentenced to death, but while in prison, he changed his mind.
If there ever was a case for clemency, this is it.
Don Vernay is one of Smith's lawyers. He blasted the board, saying its members didn't take any of his clients' good behavior into consideration.
It's a joke, except it's not funny because the guy's going to die on account of this stupidity.
The board said there was an unprecedented level of emotional testimony during the hearing. Smith's daughter testified, so did members of his victim's family. Jackie Madman is Harvey's younger sister. She says the board's decision is a relief.
It's just that age and stuff, because we have to keep hearing it year after year. We went through a lot of pain because we miss our brother every day.
The governor will now have to decide whether Smith should live or die. If he does accept the board's recommendation, Smith's lawyer says an execution date could still be a few years away. That's because a civil liberties group has launched a lawsuit against Montana for how it carries out its executions. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Edmonton.
With voting set to begin tomorrow to choose a new president, Egyptians can't stop talking about the election. This is the country's first fully free presidential vote, and it marks the transition to democracy in the country after last year's revolution that forced Hosni Mubarak from power. But not everyone is cheering. Derek Stoffel is in Cairo.
Election fever has infected Egypt. Here in Cairo, giant banners featuring smiling politicians hang high over the streets that look more like parking lots. Drivers have ample time to ponder who to vote for. Student Shadeen Tariq can't wait to cast her ballot tomorrow.
This whole election is all for democracy, so this is like a new thing where we have a chance to vote, we actually have a say in things, and freedom of changing it, knowing that you can vote and that your vote counts.
When the voting starts, there will be 13 names on the ballot, all men. 5 are in the running, 2 Islamists, one from the left, the other from the right. There are 2 candidates who served under Hosni Mubarak. That's the problem for many of those who spent weeks in Cairo's Tahrir Square last year. The revolution, they say, succeeded, but the path to democracy that followed left them shut out.
I don't think I'm very represented.
Nada Nadi says she considered not voting, but she changed her mind.
Maybe it's not very satisfying for us and for the expectations for youth after the revolution, but it is a change and it is a step ahead that we cannot ignore.
Many of the young people who fill Tahrir Square say they will organize and hope to be a force in Egypt's next round of elections. But for now, there is palpable excitement about the voting tomorrow. Turnout is expected to be high. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Cairo.
First Nations leaders meet with Prince Charles in Toronto later today. They want the Crown to honor its treaties with them. Many date back to the Royal Proclamation of 1763. It was a promise to regulate trade, settlement, and land ownership that was ultimately broken. Karen Pauls reports.
This stone symbolizes the foundation of the rights of First Nations peoples, reflected in treaties signed with the Crown.
Queen Elizabeth affirms a long-standing relationship as she presents a stone from Balmoral Castle to the First Nations University in 2005. It's that relationship that Aboriginal leaders hope to build on at a meeting with Prince Charles today.
The Crown is obligated to honor the treaties.
Ovid McCurdy is a former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He speaks for Aboriginal leaders representing treaties across Canada, and he has one request of the Prince.
To go and visit the Queen on October 6, 2013, the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation of 1763, to draw attention that these treaties have been made in good faith by our people, but that Canada has acted in bad faith.
Jacqueline Romano teaches in the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Winnipeg. She says today's meeting will likely be just a publicity opportunity.
To bring this to the attention of the monarchy, but also to the Canadians in general and the international arena, I suppose, that what happened was fundamentally, I would argue, illegal, that it was immoral, and that something really needs to be done.
Romano says the Crown has had many opportunities to put pressure on the Canadian government to honor the treaties of the past and negotiate new ones for the future. But it hasn't.
That I would call a betrayal.
And that's not a good foundation for a relationship. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And that is World Report for this hour. Stay up to date as these stories develop throughout the day.